All right, so describe how artwork and architecture changed during the early Middle Ages. Finally, detail how the Frank Kingdom weakened after the death of Charlemagne. There you go. And like I mentioned, okay, we talked quite a bit about some of the entertainment during the Middle Ages and mentioned about jousting, court gestures, you name it. All right, there you go. Give you some time to work on that. All right, so let's get to it here. Let's get to it. So, like I mentioned on Friday, we finished up talking about really what the forms of entertainment were during the Middle Ages. So, jousting, okay, lancers. We mentioned a little bit about court gesture, okay, and there are other forms of entertainment, but I think those are the ones that really stick out the most. All right. So, did anybody get to watch the movie A Knight's Tale? Anybody ever see it before? Have you what?
Long time ago.
A long time ago. Yeah, yeah. Really good movie. So if you guys get a chance, check that out. Yeah, I think it's interesting. And it's one of those movies that are not totally accurate to the time, but pretty darn close. And I think it's, like I said, entertaining to watch. All right, so real quick, Friday, we talked a lot about the architecture, okay, and some of the forms of artwork with literature, and some of the designs on the Bible. Okay, what do we remember about the forms of architecture and artwork that I showed you? How did it change drastically from before the Middle Ages, medieval times, to the early Middle Ages? Go ahead, Caroline.
We definitely saw a change of size because afterwards it was much larger. There were longer arches and columns, and then before it was obviously much shorter.
Yeah, exactly, right. Good job, good job. So this kind of brick and mortar look, where you just have a very small, kind of not even a dome shape, which almost looks like a rectangle. Yeah, you have columns there as well, but it shifts drastically through the early Middle Ages, where you see these huge, larger than life buildings. And what specifically were these buildings that they were building? What were they really designing at the focal point of these villages, of these towns during the Middle Ages, these cities? Go ahead, Austin. Okay, the manor, okay, good, but what specifically did I show you? It's the inside, the outsides of it, there's Gothic themes to it. Parker? Cathedrals, yeah, good job. Churches, right? You remember that, Austin? Some of the churches? Yeah, good, good. So these churches were huge, they were massive, and the forms of artwork, the architecture changed drastically from columns to long, large, huge arches. And the insides of these cathedrals, too, it was breathtaking, right? There's gold-plated artifacts, art was everywhere inside the church. Outside of the church, there's very fine detail within designs of different types of gargoyles and things like that, archways of the church. So it was very specific, right? It was very detailed forms of architecture during the Middle Ages. What else can we talk about? What else did I show you? Not just cathedrals, but what else? What else? There's forms of artwork. Why? Do you remember?
Go back to the sausage inside, like the banners, they were hot and decorated, especially later on.
Okay. Yeah.
Castles are less effective.
Yeah, good job. So as military tactics became a little bit stronger and weaponry, so when it came to cannons and artillery, the idea of castles just kind of went to the wayside, and they started designing these huge castles, cathedrals, churches, sorry, and the manor became a lot of these palaces would be created, and they were finally decorated. But what about books? I showed you a couple of forms of books and literature, artwork. What were they designing within these books? Go ahead, Chris.
They had like gold covers. And
Awesome.
well, back then they didn't really have a press, so
Yeah.
it was hard to mass produce books.
But just the detail inside of them, right? The fonts were totally different than what we saw beforehand, before the early Middle Ages. Gold plated, right? A lot of the fonts too. And on the pages were designed specifically with gold inside of them. And what were these forms of artwork? What were they? It wasn't just stories of warriors. What were they? What was it? Book of worships, right? Yeah, it was like the Bible. Okay, it was about verses, about stories inside the Bible, honestly, that they would detail. And a lot of these nuns, a lot of these monks would really put a lot of time and detail inside these forms of artwork. All right, good, good. Then finally, we talked about some of the weakening of the Frank Kingdom. What happened to the Frank Kingdom that caused a lot of these issues with Viking raids? What happened? Parker? Okay. Awesome. Good job. Good job. So we mentioned about a lot of these Frank leaders from Clovis all the way to Charlemagne, and how this kingdom became very large during the time. Right? They united a lot of the kingdoms within Western Europe, and then eventually, okay, obviously we talked a little bit about how it kind of came to a downfall. Right? It's not like these kingdoms just disappeared; it broke up. Right? The Frank kingdom divided into 3, 4 different sections, and the reason for it is because there really wasn't a rightful heir of the throne, and his children were fighting all for that throne. So they split the kingdoms up, and this caused a division. This caused a disunity amongst the kingdoms, and led on to a lot of Viking raids. All right, good job. And I think on Friday I showed you a few forms forms of artwork within Charlemagne, right? It's his dynasty, I guess you could say, his empire. A lot of the shields were gold plated. His crown specifically had the cross on it, and it was detailing about the alliance between that kingdom and the church, right? And how that was joined together. And that's going to lead us into the day, the High Middle Ages. Okay, we're going to talk a lot about the Crusades. Okay, I have a video for you towards the end of class, which I think it puts it in perspective that many people wouldn't survive the Crusades. And there's a lot of problems, a lot of issues that came along with it. All right, here are your terms for today. So make sure you guys are putting the date by your bell ringer. Right, write out the full question, write out a detailed response. I don't want to see a copy and pasting or anything like that. So terms for today. Moldboard Plow, 3-field system, Pope Urban II, Crusades. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the decline of the Byzantine Empire, how it kind of falls apart during the late Middle Ages. All right, so the High Middle Ages, well, it gets the name because there's a lot more innovation. Right? There's tactics and innovations, inventions that bring on change that makes life a little bit easier. There you go. Carolyn, yeah, heard of it Friday. All right, so what do we have for the moldboard plow? What is it? Pretty self-explanatory. What is it? Wyatt, what do you got?
I put, I haven't touched soil with this shit.
Yeah, good, good. So this is like tilling up the soil, right, of what we know of, agriculture and farming. And this is really first appearing during this medieval times. Okay, utilizing horses that are drawing these plows, that are pulling these plows along with them to make farming a little bit easier. Right? So the High Middle Ages brought on a lot of innovation and change when it came to growing food. Later, these tactics, these techniques would kind of fall to the wayside because you constantly till up the soil over and over and over again. These poor farming techniques would cause a little bit of issues when it comes to growing food. But during the early Middle Ages, there was a lot of problems when it came to famine. And the First Crusade especially was stricken by famine. There's very little food. So this pushed a lot of the medieval peasants, obviously these people to try to design a way to grow food a lot faster. And the moldboard plow is one of the reasons we see a little bit growth and the food supply during the High Middle Ages. And that's what brings all this change to the High Middle Ages. Okay, so coming towards the end of the early Middle Ages, there was a famine. There's a lot of issues when it came to the food supply. A lot of people died over this low food supply. And we'll talk about the First Crusade. What do you think this led to? And these people are running low on food. Well, what do you think is going to happen to these crusaders on their march down to the Middle East? What do you think is going to happen? Amelia, what do you think is going to happen? They're going to starve to death. Good job. And what might it resort to? Unfortunately, I don't want to talk about that too much. Ozzy? Cannibalism. Yeah, good job. So, yeah, there was a lot of signs and reports of cannibalism on the First Crusade because really the lack of food. And moving into the High Middle Ages, we see this plow being created and these farming techniques being utilized to bring on a little bit more food supply and growth. Yeah, not to dampen the Tuesday here for it, but yeah, there was a lot of cannibalism going on during the Crusades. All right, three-field system. Yeah, it doesn't feel like one, right? It's like a Monday. Three-field system, pretty easy here too. Alana, go ahead. Yeah, good job. So the peasants we know that are their job is really just provide food for the kingdom. And the three-field system is rotating crops amongst these three fields. And the reason for it is because you're trying to build more nitrogen, a little bit more yield to these fields. If you keep growing the same product over and over and over again, especially potatoes, let's say, that rids the soil of its natural nutrients. That's a pretty big crop that does that. So you need to rotate the fields in order to bring in a little bit more nutrients to these farm fields eventually, continue to grow them. Right? Again, it's one of these ideas, these techniques that are first emerging that brings on the High Middle Ages, which brings a lot more food supplies at times. Okay, so again, a very innovative idea, a very great idea to bring along a larger food supply. Pope Urban II, what do we have for him? Who is this guy? Chris, go ahead.
He was the pope that executed the Crusades.
Yeah, good job, good job. So he sees the Muslim groups emerging still into parts of Spain and North Africa, the presence there in the Middle East, and even moving into what we know as the Byzantine Empire. All right, I know it says Ottoman Empire up here, guys, but at one point this was the Byzantine Empire. And this still held some Christianity, the religion there was Christianity. And eventually this is going to be threatened by a lot of these Muslim Islamic groups that are emerging here in the Middle East, moving into Europe. So Pope Urban II decided to really launch the Crusades because he wants to make sure that territory is safe and secure for Christianity. So the Pope, he's calling on all these kingdoms here in Western Europe to fortify their troops, bring their militaries to fight the Muslims and capture the key city of Jerusalem. Right? So this is the start of the Holy Wars. So if you have to come up with an idea, when it comes to the creation and the start of the Crusades, Pope Urban II is the one who initiates it all. Again, mostly for territories, right? And how do you think he builds up support for the Crusades? What do you think he does? What do you think he does? What does he promise to the peasants? These people that are going to be fighting in these wars. Go ahead, Ozzy.
Part of all cities.
Yeah, good job, good job. He said, hey, if you fight in this war, if you're victorious, obviously great, you're going to live. But if you die, which many people did, chances of you dying are a lot higher than survive. Then yeah, your sins will be forgiven, right? All sins, no matter what it would be. Okay, and this is a way to try to build up motivation to fight in these wars. And again, showing the significance of what in the people's lives, religion, right? Yeah, good job. Yeah. So we'll talk about the Crusades here. We'll break them down into 4 Crusades. There are 9 in total, but we'll just break them down into 4 and really talk about those specifically. All right, and then finally, the Byzantine Empire. What do we have for that? What do we have? I know I mentioned a little bit already. Go ahead, Chris.
It was basically the remnants of the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
And they did a lot of funding for the Crusades.
Good job, good job. So yeah, we have the Byzantine Empire, which is what's left over of ancient Rome, the Roman Empire, and they're residing more towards what we know as the Mediterranean Sea, okay, Southeast Europe, okay, moving into the Middle East, right, modern day Turkey. Right, up there on the map, it's what it's shown as, what I detailed earlier, the Ottoman Empire. Okay, eventually that will fall, but one of the last crusades is detailed around the Byzantine Empire. What's up?
Said Jeremy was supposed to be looking up to say that some everybody looking more than
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All right, so what were the reasons why the Dark Ages drew to a close, the High Middle Ages came about? Well, there's a lot of innovations. There's a lot of developments. Okay, like I mentioned, when we were going over the vocab with the First Crusade, one of the biggest issues was food supply. A lot of these people died just because of famine. There's a lot of issues when it came to producing food and providing for these kingdoms in Western Europe. So what brought on the High Middle Ages, why they consider it the High Middle Ages, is because there's more innovation. There's more creation when it comes to really developing farming techniques, farming practices, and providing food for all the people within the kingdoms. So that's really what brings on a lot of change. So new agricultural techniques, the moldboard plow, okay, like I just talked about, and how this was pulled by a horse, sometimes even ox, okay, cattle, to create, till up the fields. Okay, so this will provide a better way of producing food for the kingdoms. Also, we got a 3-field system. Like I said, we have a crop rotation. If you just continue to grow the same crop over and over and over again within a farm field, then that's not going to do it any justice. Eventually, you'll see the nutrients being rid out of the field, and you'll see a depletion of the goods being produced. So it's important that these fields continue to get rotated, right? And we have a 3-field system for growth and for production of food. Again, this is some of the ideas, the thoughts, the techniques being applied that brought on a little bit more food supply to end this harsh famine that leads right into the year 1000. Okay. And finally, we have a horse collar, right? So you know what a horse collar is? It just really goes around the horse as a pull these plows along to till up the fields, producing more food for the kingdom. So again, utilizing cattle, utilizing horses to their advantage, okay, to help them produce as much food as possible to end some of the burdens of famine. All right, and also the Viking invasions began to taper off. Okay, so like I mentioned, as the Frank kingdom was becoming so large under Charlemagne, right, eventually he was going to die. He couldn't live forever. And when that happened, this kind of divided up his kingdom because, well, his kids were all fighting for the throne. So they decided to create their own separate kingdoms. And once you become divided, well, you're not as strong to fight off these outside forces. But eventually, with this development, okay, and with these techniques and a larger food supply, this brought these kingdoms closer together as trading became more prominent and military assistance became more effective when it came to some of these groups that were emerging in these kingdoms. All right, so like I said, the government, militaries became stronger to fight them off. All right, and some settled down and converted to Christianity. So as long as they're converted to Christianity, they're good to go. They're allowed to settle within these kingdoms. All right, showing again the presence of religion during the Middle Ages. All right, so that's why the High Middle Ages gets its name, right? That's why we see a difference, a move from the early Middle Ages, the Dark Ages, to the High Middle Ages. A lot of it because of innovation. A lot of it because, well, there's a larger food supply. And religion is bringing these kingdoms closer together, right? Settling some of these differences and creating a common enemy, right? So that's what Pope Urban II decided to do, and actually united Western Europe for really the first time, and bringing these kingdoms closer together. Ever since Charlemagne died, obviously, the Frank Kingdom did it first. Well, then once a lot of the issues emerged, then the Pope bringing them all together. So here's just a picture of what this horse-drawn plow would look like. Okay, very similar to what we kind of still see today with the Amish, I guess. But yeah, again, it just shows the more innovation, okay, better farming tactics and techniques, providing more of a food supply to the times. And that's what brings on the High Middle Ages. All right, so this is the age. I guess you could put the year range from the High Middle Ages, 900 to 1250. Okay, like I said, there is a transition, and a lot of it is because of the famine, pushing for better farming tactics and techniques. That's what we consider as the High Middle Ages. Doesn't sound pretty high, huh?
Famine, High Middle Ages.
Well, it brings these new farming techniques, right? We see innovation because of the famine, right? All right, so Pope Urban II. Okay, like I mentioned before in your vocab, this is the man that's going to draw these kingdoms together to fight off the rival, the opposition to Christianity. Okay, and religion's going to be the driving factor that unites these kingdoms together. Like I mentioned, under Charlemagne, these kingdoms, this empire was large, it was huge, and there was stability, there was protection. And that's what you got to think of with the early Middle Ages. They're all seeking protection. They're all seeking safety. Now, once that safety and protection is given to the people of Western Europe, then they can look to expand. Then they can look to try to claim more territory for Christianity, try to convert as much people as possible to the religion. And that's what Pope Urban II decided to do. All right, so real quick, here's what the Crusades kind of look like. Right, some of these marches that began, like I said, I want to break it down into 4 different sections. There were 9 crusades, but the 4 really stick out the most. The first crusade was considered somewhat of a victory, somewhat successful, right? And like I mentioned, this is Pope Urban II trying to bring these forces together and in Western Europe to fight off the opposition, these Islamic groups, these Muslim groups, and capture Jerusalem, capture these holy cities. And on their way, they decided to try to take down anybody that was, obviously not embracing Christianity. So even if there was, obviously, the very similar forms of religion of Christianity, branches of it, let's say Orthodox, well, that didn't really align with their views. So what do you think they did to these people that were just off the script a little bit? They didn't have a gun, but yeah, they killed them, right? They killed them. So not only were they killing these Muslim groups, these Islamic groups that have a different religion, even Jewish religion, obviously, as well, but also branches of Christianity. And they killed literally anybody that challenged it, that was just scripted off the main course of Catholicism. Right? And like I mentioned, one of the biggest issues with the First Crusade is that there was famine. There was a lot of death because there was very low food supplies. And eventually, once the High Middle Ages took off, there were more food supply. And unfortunately, with the First Crusade, this led to a lot of cannibalism. Unfortunately, pretty sad stuff. All right, moving into the Second Crusade. All right, like I said, the First Crusade somewhat of a victory because the Christians, right, they marched down into the Holy City, captured it, and it was viewed as a success. But do you think these Muslim groups are just going to allow the Christians just to take it over? Do you think they're going to launch more attacks on the Christian groups? Yeah, of course they will. And this pushes for obviously a lot of problems, a lot of issues in the Holy City, to a point where they have to launch that second crusade, a second venture down to the Holy City and to try to take it over. And this was a complete failure. It did not work out for Christians. It did not work out for the Western Europeans. Okay, and this really just came to an end. Right, that second crusade just didn't work out whatsoever. The third crusade is considered one of the most prominent. Okay, this featured a lot of figures, which I'll probably put out the terms tomorrow for you to understand, because I don't want to load you up with a lot of terms. But there is a man named Richard the Lionheart. Pretty cool name. You guys ever hear that before? Richard the Lionheart. Yeah, what do we know about him? What do we know about him? Chris, go ahead. Rob. Yeah, okay. Okay, good. So Richard the Lionheart, he is going to lead a lot of his kingdom in Western Europe, along with Emperor Barbarossa. Okay, he was considered one of the emperors of the Holy Roman Empire. Remember how I said Charlemagne was the first Holy Roman Emperor? Well, eventually Barbarossa would be. And he would lead his forces down into the Middle East to fight off these Muslim raiders. And that did not work out either. It actually became a huge failure. A lot of these key figures in Western Europe fighting off some of these Muslim raiders in the Middle East, it just did not work. And why do you think it didn't work? Do you think there's disputes between the kingdoms, between the leadership? Yeah, there's a lot of conflict when it came to trying to unite these forces together. A little easier said than done. Yeah, you can have a commonality of religion, building these forces together. But after that, once you're making the large marches, once food supplies become low, once a lot of your soldiers are dying of disease and sickness, do you think it might drive a wedge between these kingdoms? Of course it would, right? So unfortunately, these forces just fell apart. Okay, there's a lot of issues. And I thought it was interesting, Emperor Barbarossa, he actually drowned when he was just taking a swim, when he was trying to bathe himself in the river. So he just died. He just died. So there, all of his men were just left with these two other leaders that obviously they didn't respect. That was some pretty wild times. And then finally, the last crusade was fought over really the Byzantine Empire. So it actually happened here in Constantinople. And the Pope obviously wanted to conquer that land. Yeah, they respected Christianity there, but it was a little bit of a different perspective, a different viewpoint. So they tried to ransack it, and they did. And this is where we see the fall of the Byzantine Empire with the last crusade. Right? Officially, it doesn't end until the 1400s, but in all reality, there was really no strength, no stability in the Byzantine Empire after the last crusade. All right, I'm going to put a little bit of a notes for you guys here in the video lesson for today. So I know I ran through it pretty quick, but I think it's important for you guys to see that. So when you go to Canvas, with the fourth crusade, well, all the crusades here, you just go to modules, you go to the video lesson for today, so 9.6, and then you can see a little bit of a breakdown of what the crusades were. Oh, I forgot to save it here for you. Just let me bring it over. So you can see the summary real quick of the crusades attached to the video lesson. So I have the video lesson here, and a breakdown of the crusades, because I know I skimmed through it pretty quick because of time purposes. And then we'll watch the video at the start of class tomorrow about life during the crusades. All right? So again, sorry, it was pretty quick, but in all reality, the only thing you got to know of the crusades is a lot of death, holy wars, future territory, and it became a huge failure for the Western European kingdoms. So again, not very successful, but one uniting figure, one uniting fact was that religion brought these kingdoms closer together. All right, is there any questions on the Crusades? All right, so again, I'll start off with a video more tomorrow and kind of put it in perspective of what the Crusades were all about and life during the Crusades. All right, there you go. So remember, Friday,